What if the wine reached her lips? What if the cask was not stopped in time and Daenerys Targaryen died in Drogo's tent before any dragon ever felt its first breath of fire? In this video, we follow that night to its bitter end. The tent is hot and close as the sun sinks over Vaes Dothrak, the air heavy with horse sweat and incense. The wine merchant bows low, his eyes never leaving them. Silver-haired Khaleesi, as he offers the dark cask of Arbor Red, she smiles, tired but curious, and takes the cup. Drogo watches from the shadows, silent and proud. A king among riders, Jorah tenses but moves too slowly this time. She drinks. Nothing seems wrong at first. The room goes silent only in her mind as the taste turns to ash on her tongue. Her hand trembles. The cup slips and strikes the packed earth with a dull thud, wine spilling like blood across the rugs. She reaches for Drogo, her eyes wide and confused. Then she collapses before anyone can draw a sword or shout a warning. In truth, this is the night the Mother of Dragons never is. There is no funeral pyre on the Dothraki Sea, no unburnt queen walking through the flames, no three small shapes clinging to her shoulders and screaming at the stars. The eggs remain cold, stone and pretty trinkets for carry-on men to fight over. The old magic that should have flared back into the world stays sleeping, and the sky above Essos is dark and empty. If this continues, if Daenerys Stormborn dies nameless in a foreign tent, what happens to the story we know? No breaker of chains marches through Slaver's Bay, no unsullied stand in perfect lines beneath a dragon's shadow. No Dothraki horde thunders across the Blackwater to sack King's Landing. There is no Drogon to strike down the Sons of the Harpy, no Rhaegal or Viserion to burn wagons. Walls no sack of the capital from the sky. Instead, the world shifts slowly and in silence. Westeros still tears itself apart in the War of the Five Kings. But there is no Silver Queen gathering strength across the narrow sea, no whispered tale of a Targaryen girl with living dragons to haunt Varys' plans, or Stannis' claim when the long night comes. There is no dragon fire over Winterfell. No burning trench lit by a screaming Khalasar. The Night King faces only men, steel, and failing courage. So in this episode, we stay in-world moment to moment. From the instant Daenerys hits the ground in Drogo's tent to the last stand in the north, we track how her death rips through Vaes Dothrak, through Qarth and Slaver's Bay, through the Red Keep, and the wall itself. We ask, who takes the Dothraki, if anyone, who dares the cities of Slaver's Bay without her who rises in Westeros to challenge the Lannisters? When there is no Dragon Queen on the horizon, and when the dead finally march, does the Night King win by default, or does some other hard-eyed knight step forward and say, this does not need to end in blood, the world itself goes on? Trial for losing its most volatile player, and every king, lord, and sellsword will feel the strike of that poisoned cup. By the end, we will reach a different kind of final showdown in the north, with no dragons in the sky and no Silver Queen in the snow. The room goes silent. Your Highness? The wine seller purrs, bowing so low his beard brushes the rugs. It is an honor beyond words. A cask fit for a king, opened only for the Mother of Mountains herself. His eyes flicker up, oily and quick, weighing her like coin. Doria leans in, curious, her breath warm at Daenerys' ear as she studies the dark liquid. I've never seen wine that color, she murmurs slowly. So deep, like blood. Behind them, Jorah watches, thick arms folded, the set of a knight who has seen too many traps and too many dead girls on foreign floors. In truth, he means to speak. He means to step forward, to take the first sip as he once did. But a rider pushes through the crowd at the edge of the room, braid swinging, eyes wide with the kind of news that changes a life. He hisses something in Dothraki, a name, a title, a fate. Viserys. The word cuts through Jorah like a sword. The usurper's dog king crowned him, the rider gasps. Crown of gold. Crown of death. Jorah turns just for a heartbeat to see if Drogo is heard. Drogo lounges by the fire, amused, indifferent, a hand resting on the knife at his belt as if this is all a small thing. The air in the sacred tabernacle is thick, slow, incense and hoarse, and sweat pressed under the Mother of Mountains. Torches spit. Shadows climb the carved pillars. The wine merchant smiles and lifts the cup. Daenerys takes it. The metal is cool against her fingers. The rich, dark wine catches the lamplight, almost black, a promise and a threat in one. She glances at Drogo, seeking his eyes, finding only that lazy pride, that quiet certainty that nothing in this room could ever strike at him. To my son, she says. Her voice does not tremble. The stallion who mounts the world. And before Jorah can turn back, before the warning can form on his tongue, she drinks, deeply. The first swallow burns. The second is ash. By the third, her breath stutters. Her hand twitches. The cup slips, slow at first, then fast, metal ringing against her knuckles as it tears free. Wine spills like blood across the pale rugs, dark and spreading, soaking into wool that has seen 100 calls kneel and rise. Daenerys' knees buckle. She reaches for nothing, fingers clawing at air. Her eyes go wide, then wider, as if she can see the strike coming from inside her own veins. Drogo frowns, confused. This is not a wound he understands. There is no sword, no spear, no enemy to cut. He rises anyway, suddenly, violently. The room goes silent again as his shadow falls over her collapsing form. She hits the ground hard. A soft sound leaves her, half cough, half choke, and foam touches the corner of her mouth. Her body shudders once, then twice, as if some unseen hand is shaking the life out of her. If this continues, every Dothraki in Vaes Dothrak will see their Khaleesi die on holy ground. Khaleesi! Jorah's voice breaks as he lunges too late. His hands hover, useless, afraid to move her, afraid not to. He can hear only her ragged breaths and the distant chant of the Dosh Khaleen outside. Suddenly wrong, suddenly cruel. Drogo roars. Not a battle cry, but something raw, ripped from the chest of a man who does not know how to fight poison. He bellows for the Dosh Khaleen, for wise women, for anyone who can drag her back from this invisible edge. Jorah finally looks up. The wine merchant is frozen, eyes wide, feet edging back toward the tent flap. Jorah sees understanding there, and fear, and a plan already dying. In truth, this does not need to end in blood, but his hand goes to his sword all the same. Their gazes lock for a single terrible heartbeat. Then we cut away, before we learn whether the Mother of Dragons ever draws another breath. Jorah moves first. His sword flashes out, knocking the goblet from the merchant's hand, wine and poison spilling across the packed earth. The man bolts. Jorah's shoulder slams into his back, drives him down, the breath bursting from both of them in a harsh grunt. For a heartbeat, the room goes silent, save for the scuffle and the distant snort of horses outside. Then the scream comes, not from the merchant, from the tent where Daenerys lies. They drag the wine cellar away, shouting, kicking, but the sound is already fading in Jorah's ears as he turns. He runs. The world narrows to the flap of the tent, the smell of incense and sweat and blood, the low, frantic Dothraki voices inside. He shoves through the curtain and stops so suddenly it feels like a sword has gone through his own chest. Daenerys is still... Her skin is too pale, her lips already losing color. The Dosh Khaleen cluster around her, old hands stained, herbs scattered, bowls overturned as if they have tried everything and broken their own rights in their desperation. One crone presses an ear to her belly, then slowly shakes her head. The unborn child has gone quiet forever. Drogo is on his knees beside the bed, his massive hands cradling her small, lifeless body, as though she might yet wake if he only holds her tightly enough. His braids spill over her, his beard is wet with tears he does not seem to feel. He does not speak, he only stares at her face, eyes wide, as if refusing the truth sitting inches from his sword-calloused fingers. In truth, there is no Mirri Maz Duur here, no blood magic bargain to twist this fate. Only a young woman who drank too late from a poisoned cup, and a son who will never draw breath. When Drogo finally moves, it is not gentle. He rises without a word, lifting Daenerys in his arms, carrying her out into the open air of Vaes Dothrak. The crone's protests then fall silent under his gaze. Outside, the Colosser gathers, the ring of riders tightening, voices dying as they see their Khaleesi's limp hands, the way her hair hangs, the way her head lolls with each step. Drogo walks straight to the place where the wine merchant kneels in chains. There is no speech. No demand for names. Drogo's grief has curdled into something harder, a murderous rage that needs no language. He takes a horse's tether, loops it around the man's neck, and with one brutal strike of his fist sends him stumbling forward. The stallion surges. The merchant is dragged screaming through the sacred streets, skull cracking on stone, blood smearing the ground that was meant to know no such stain. Call after call watches. Vaes Dothrak, the city where even a king's sword is meant to stay sheathed, becomes a place of execution. The gathered riders do not move to stop him, but their eyes follow every heartbeat of the death, and something cold settles over the crowd. If this continues, what law remains for the horse lords at all? Around the fires that night, the whispers start. Some say the foreign Khaleesi was a cursed witch, that her pale hair and dragon tails brought doom, that the stillborn stallion in her womb proves the gods have turned from Drogo. Others murmur that it is Drogo who is cursed now, that a Khale who breaks the peace of Vaes Dothrak for love has doomed his Khailazar to fracture. Jorah sits apart, the dragon eggs heavy in the chest before him. His hands rest on the lid, but he cannot bring himself to open it. His path had been clear. Guard her, guide her, buy back his honor with every strike of his sword in her name. Now there is only the echo of her voice and 3 dead stones that were meant to hatch under a sky of fire. Without Daenerys, what are they? Expensive baubles for some Carthene magister, or the last cold embers of a prophecy that will never burn? Viserys is already a memory in the grass, his golden crown washed away by time and rain. Drogo's great invasion of the western lands was to ride behind his son and the mother of dragons. Now there is no son, no mother, no dragons. The Dothraki feel the omen like a chill wind, and already small knots of riders talk of leaving, of finding a stronger star to follow. Far to the west, kings will still rise and fall, swords will still clash in silent halls and bloody fields. But with the last clear Targaryen hope dead in a foreign tent, with her eggs unhatched and her name already turning to dust on Dothraki tongues, the question hangs over Essos and Westeros alike like a storm cloud. If fire will not come from the east, who, if anyone, will carry it into the darkness? And as Drogo orders the first pyre built, not for dragons but for a funeral, the shape of that darkness begins to change. The pyre is not for dragons. It is for a young, foreign Khaleesi whose breath has already stilled. Smoke rises over Vaes Dothrak as Daenerys Stormborn is laid out beneath the Mother of Mountains, and the ripples from her death move faster than the flames that lick at the wood. Among the Dosh Khaleen, the room goes silent. Old women with clouded eyes and tattooed, wrinkled hands murmur to one another in the shadow of her body, arguing over omens. The crone who first named her child the stallion that mounts the world strikes her staff on the stone and insists the prophecy is not broken, only delayed, that the great stallion will simply choose another womb. Others hiss that the stallion has died in the mare before he could be born, that this bloodline is ended, that Drogo's promised destiny has gone up in smoke with the pale girl on the bier. In truth, this is not a quiet theological dispute. It is a knife at Drogo's throat, because as the crones bicker, word runs through the Khalasar that the Khale whose son was to conquer the earth has lost both wife and child under the very protection of the sacred city. Men mutter that the gods have turned their eyes. Rivals who once watched Drogo from a distance now ride a little closer, counting riders, weighing chances. Blood riders who would have cut their own throats at his command now trade slow glances, wondering if this continues. Will they die for a king whose star is already falling? A Khal whose omens sour is a Khal whose riders drift away. No sword has been drawn yet, but the threat is in every sidelong look. Procedures must still be obeyed. The Dothraki do not shed blood in Vaes Dothrak, so Daenerys' killers will never be named here. But her body is washed in the lake, anointed with oils, and wrapped in fine silks that look strange on Dothraki shoulders. She is given a pyre worthy of a Khaleesi, her silver mare led in slow circles around the wood. Then comes the question that stills even the horses. What are the stone eggs? Some say they were her bride gift, and so belong to Drogo, to be traded for swords and slaves. One crone claims they are sacred, payment the gods themselves placed in her hands, and must remain with the Dosh Khaleen. Jorah, hovering like a tired knight at the edge of every council, dares to speak. His voice is rough, but his eyes are clear. These are not trinkets, he tells Drogo in private, or perhaps the crones in a low firelit circle. He speaks of old Valyria, of Targaryen kings and the dragons that once turned armies to ash. He does not know they will hatch without her, but he knows enough to fear a world where they are smashed for coin. This does not need to end in blood, he says, meaning not men's blood, but the blood of a vanished magic. The pattern breaks for a heartbeat when one crone whispers that the eggs killed her, that the poison was only the first strike and the curse did the rest. Cursed or holy, weapons or relics. At last, the Dosh Khaleen give their ruling. The eggs are touched by powers older than any cow. They must be claimed or destroyed. Drogo's jaw tightens. He makes a harsh, sudden vow in his own tongue about what he will do with them, about how no man will ever say Khal Drogo feared a dead woman's stones. The wind howls. The pyre waits. And we pull away before the first torch falls, the fate of the world's last dragons hanging in the smoke above Vaes Dothrak. The smoke rises. The pyre devours wood and flesh and silk. But no one waits for a miracle this time. There is no queen walking into the fire, no three small shapes curled in the embers. Only a dead girl, a dead dream, and 3 stones that refuse to wake. Months pass. The Khalasar moves, but it moves like a wounded animal, lashing out without purpose. Drogo rides at its head, his braids still long, his face a mask that never softens. The grief he buried in the flames does not burn away, it hardens. He drinks more. He presses every raid harder, pushes his riders to strike deeper into Lazarene lands, to take more slaves, more blood, as if slaughter can drown the memory of a silver-haired girl and the child she carried. His wound festers. The cut he took in the Lazaran raid, the same wound that once led Daenerys to beg for aid, goes poorly tended now. There is no gentle hand to argue with the healers, no desperate plea that this does not need to end in blood and flies. The gash reddens, swells, poisons his veins. Drogo refuses to slow. He rides until he can no longer sit a saddle, until one day he simply does not rise. No blood magic, no catatonia. Just a Kale who pushed too far and fell. The room goes silent when his body is laid out in the tent. No stallion that mounts the world. No foreign Khaleesi to gather the scattered pieces. In truth, the Dothraki were always a storm held together by fear and momentum. And with Drogo gone, the storm breaks apart. Blood riders argue, blades flash, oaths are shouted and then forgotten. Within weeks, the once mighty Khalasar fractures into hard, lean shards, each new Khal taking those who will follow and riding off to hunt and raid as they always have, but never again as one. The dragon eggs do not burn on any pyre. They pass from hand to hand, stolen when Drogo's tent is looted, traded for horses and steel, carried slowly west. One ends up in Karth, a dead relic in a merchant prince's vault, its colors dulled beneath dust. Another is sold in Pentos, admired by soft-handed collectors who whisper of Valyria while it sits silent on a shelf. The third vanishes with a rider cut down on some nameless road, buried under mud and time. The world's last dragons become curiosities, not omens. Across the narrow sea, the game in the redstone corridors of King's Landing plays out almost unchanged. Robert still dies on his boar hunt, his breath rattling as he names a regent he thinks he can trust. Ned still falls, a lone honorable man in a room full of knives. His sword never rises for a trial by combat. Instead, the false king's command and Cersei's cold eyes see him struck down. The War of the Five Kings erupts on schedule, banners rising like flames from Winterfell to the Stormlands. But there is no distant queen whispered about in small council chambers, no half-remembered fear of dragonfire returning from the east. Varys' birds do not speak of unsullied legions marching, or a silver-haired Targaryen buying ships. The Lannisters and their enemies fight a smaller, crueler war, bound by river and hill and castle wall. If this continues, the endgame of this story will not be written in shadow over King's Landing, but in the cold far north, where something older than any Khal is still watching, and waiting for a world without dragons. And when winter finally comes, there will be no firestorm descending from the sky to meet it. Without dragons to answer the dark, the camera cuts back east, to a single man who failed to bring them into the world. Ser Jorah Mormont rides alone when the Khalasar finally splinters. Drogo's wound festers, the healers mutter, and the great Khal who once seemed carved from iron slowly rots from the inside. When he falls from his horse for the last time, no pyre is lit for a dragon queen, no miracle firestorm rises. There is only the stink of blood and horse sweat, and an exiled knight who cannot meet anyone's eyes. He remembers the wine, he remembers the merchant's trembling hands, remembers how close his sword came to striking the cup away in time. In truth, that moment becomes the line that divides his life. Before, he was a disgraced lord chasing a pardon. After, he is the man who watched the last Targaryen girl die choking on sweet red poison. The Dothraki do what they always do. They scatter, they raid, they forget. Viserys is a name spat once and lost on the wind. Daenerys is a small burnt cairn on the edge of Vice Dothrak, already half forgotten by the time the last of Drogo's blood riders ride off in different directions. Jorah does not follow them. He sells his horse, then his armor, then his pride, piece by piece, until he is just a hired sword drifting between Caravan and Port City, a silent shadow at the edge of a torchlit room. It is in one of those smoky rooms in Pentos or maybe Norvos that the world shifts again. A fat Yatish factor, drunk and loud, crows that the usurper king is dead. Robert Baratheon killed by his own hunts, the realm torn open in war. The room goes silent for a heartbeat as men weigh what that means. Then the dice start to clatter again, but for Jorah, breath catches in his throat. If this continues, chaos in Westeros means opportunity. A new king, or several would-be kings, might grant a pardon to a useful exile. He has something they might want. Knowledge of Dothraki strength, Essos coin flows, the soft underbelly of the free cities. And perhaps more than that, because Jorah did not leave Vaes Dothrak empty-handed. In the confusion after Daenerys' death, the 3 stone eggs passed from hand to greedy hand. At least one ends in Jorah's saddlebags, wrapped in rough spun, heavy as guilt. To him it is a relic, a curiosity, nothing more. He thinks of Karth with its vaunted wealth, of Pentoshi magisters who would pay a king's ransom for such a symbol, or even of the Lannisters who might fancy a dragon's egg on a mantelpiece in the rock. So the path forks. He could ride to Karth, sell the egg to a pureborn merchant prince, and vanish into comfortable obscurity. He could sail for King's Landing, kneel before whoever wears the crown, and offer both the egg and his sword, swearing to fight Robb Stark, Stannis, or any other rebel if that is the price of going home. He could cross the narrow sea to the young wolf himself. trading tales of Essos and Dothraki tactics for the chance to bleed for the north instead of against it. In truth, every road is stained by the same blood. No matter which banner he chooses, he will be a man buying forgiveness with secrets. Yet before he decides, another whisper reaches him. In Karth, they say, pale warlocks have begun asking after dragon relics. From Ashai, gaunt shadowbinders drift through Lys and Volantis, their eyes too bright, their questions too sharp whenever the word dragon is spoken. Men in these ports laugh and say the world's magic is dead, that these are just hungry charlatans chasing old tales. But when Jorah fingers the cold, scaled shell in the dark and hears, or thinks he hears, something shift deep inside the stone, he begins to wonder whether the world is as dormant as it seems, and who else might already be hunting what he carries toward Westeros. Jorah is wrong. Nothing inside the stone is waking. No heartbeat, no stir of wings, no breath waiting to strike the world. When the assassin's wine steals Daenerys' life in Vaes Dothrak, the last true spark that might have answered those eggs dies with her. Drogo burns anyway. The Khalasar gathers on the open grass, a rough circle of men and horses under a wide, silent sky. There is no comet overhead, no ring of dragon eggs placed with careful hands, no young queen walking slowly into the flames, only a dead caul on a wooden frame soaked in oil, the crack of torches, the reek of burning hair and blood as the pyre takes. The Dothraki watch until his flesh is ash and the smoke thins and drifts away, and the world does not change. The room goes silent inside every man who expected an omen and gets only darkness. In truth, this is the hinge where the story of magic itself bends. In canon, Drogon's first scream is like a sword drawn across the whole world, a sound that wakes things that had been sleeping since the fall of Valyria. Shadow babies slip from Melisandre's body with impossible ease. Whites grow stronger and bolder. Glass candles burn again in the black towers of Old Town. Here, there is no ignition point, no sudden surge. Magic remains what it was at the start of the tale, weaker, rarer, and fiercely local, bound to cold gods in the far north and red priests who bleed themselves raw for every small miracle. The eggs become what most men already believe them to be, stones, heavy, beautiful, inert. Jorah sells one to pay passage west, its scaled surface passing from shipmaster to merchant prince until it vanishes behind the carved doors of a Carthene vault. Another is bartered by Illyrio for favors, perhaps ending in the hands of Piat Pri or the Undying, locked in the House of the Undying as a trophy of a dead age. The last is hoarded by a collector in Pentos or Bravos, an object of obsession, not transformation. Men argue over their price, not their power. If this continues, every great working of the later story comes at a steeper cost. Melisandre can still birth a shadow to kill a king, but she needs more king's blood. More fires, more of her own strength burned away, and each shadow is thinner, less certain. Qyburn's abominations lurch and move, yet they are closer to butchery than sorcery, his mountains slower, his eyes duller. North of the wall, the White Walkers can still raise the dead, but the great waves of whites are fewer. Corpses lie where they fall instead of clawing back to their feet in unending ranks. Pattern interrupt. Without dragons, the strangest change is in memory itself. No black wings over Karth, no burning of Astapor, no living proof that fire can answer ice. Children in Fleabottom grow up hearing only half-believed tales of beasts that once darkened the sun. Maesters shake their heads and say such things never truly existed, that these stories are symbols, not history. And in the far north, as the long night slowly gathers and the dead king in blue fire marches with no rival in the sky, a question hangs over every empty horizon. If dragons never return, when the last dawn comes, does anyone even remember that the world was once capable of fighting back? In truth, the north is not the only place reshaped by the missing fire in the sky. The game in the south twists just as sharply when there is no whisper of a dragon queen sailing west. In King's Landing, the small council still meets in that narrow, suffocating room, but the talk is different. No Illyrio letters about a silver-haired girl, no Varys murmuring of Dothraki riders staring at a poisoned sea. Tywin's shadow hangs over every decision, yet his eyes are turned almost wholly inward. The room goes silent not at the word Targaryen, but when ravens speak of Robb Stark's victories, of Renly's banners, of Stannis' claim. The eastern threat has been reduced to old songs and ash. The council's fear is no longer invasion from across the water, but the realm tearing itself apart from within. That shift hardens Cersei. Without dragons in her nightmares, she spends less breath on distant prophecies and more on crushing the wolves and the stag pretenders before they can draw another sword. Tywin too allocates with cold precision. No gold quietly funneled into ships against some future dragon fire. No agents sent to sniff out sellswords in Pentos. Every coin, every night, every cart of grain is aimed at the Riverlands and the Stormlands. He moves sooner, presses harder, willing to bleed the West dry if it means Robb Stark never reaches the Golden Tooth and Stannis never reaches the Blackwater. At the Blackwater itself, nothing changes in the moment of impact. The wildfire still blooms, green and merciless, Stannis' fleet still shatters, men still scream as the river turns to burning glass. But the meaning of that defeat is different. There is no unspoken clock ticking down to the day dragons will roast the Lannister fleet in the same bay. For Stannis, this is not a setback before some greater realignment. It is the breaking of his only real chance. If this continues, his name becomes a curse muttered on Dragonstone's winds, not a rallying cry. For the Lannisters, the victory feels final. Their dominance after the battle is not a fragile bridge to a future war against fire made flesh, but the start of a long, unchallenged reign. The Tyrells see that clearly. With no Daenerys to appear out of the east and turn their careful garden into kindling, Marjorie's wedding bed looks like safer soil. Highgarden throws itself even more fully behind the lion. More grain, more soldiers, more patient smiles in the throne room as they prop up Joffrey, then Tommen, calculating that time is on their side and that no dragon will ever darken the reach. And for the disillusioned, the world feels smaller. Tyrion cannot secretly imagine some foreign queen toppling his sister. Varys has no hidden prince or princess to pin his webs upon. Even Jon Snow, staring into the silent night beyond the wall, has no distant Targaryen savior to share the burden. This does not need to end in blood, they tell themselves, but every path forward runs through the same broken court, the same iron chair. With no queen across the sea, every hope, every betrayal, every last breath must be spent inside the system that is already killing them. The question becomes brutal and simple. If no one is coming from Essos, who in Westeros dares to unmake the game itself? If no one in Westeros is willing to break the game, then no one in Essos ever even sits down at the table. Across the narrow sea, the poisoned wine does its work. Daenerys falls before the pyre, before the dragon eggs, before the fire can answer her blood. There is no waking at dawn with cracked shell and smoke in her hair, no newborn dragons clinging to her skin. The night is silent, and it stays that way. In Astapor, the slavers keep marching boys into the training yards. Wooden swords, real pain. The Unsullied are broken the old way, one name after another stripped away until only obedience remains. There is no silver-haired queen to buy them with a single word and turn their spears. The whip still cracks and the line still moves. In truth, the greatest infantry in the world remains chained to the red streets of the Giscari cities, an engine of conquest for men who never see the front lines. Yonkai's wise masters keep their carpets and their coins. Meereen's great masters still look down from their pyramids with cold eyes, counting slaves instead of years. The Harpy sigil never burns above a city gate. It hangs untouched, a stone promise that nothing will change. The room goes silent only when a disobedient slave is dragged out and the blood hits the bricks. Missandei keeps translating bargains she did not make, her sharp mind wasted on smoothing over cruelty. She is another soft voice in a hard market, forgotten as soon as the deal is struck. Grey Worm dies in some alley in Astapor, or on some nameless wall, or he does not die at all, and it hardly matters. He is one helm among thousands, a faceless knight of no king, a sword that never learns it can choose where to strike. Daario Naharis rides with the Second Sons from contract to contract, changing sides for gold instead of for a girl who believes this does not need to end in blood. Without Daenerys, there is no siege of Yunkai, no sack of Meereen, no Sons of the Harpy rising to claw back power because it was never taken from them. The Harpy cult stays in the shadows where it began. A quiet terror used to keep slaves obedient, not a full-fledged insurgency that forces the world to look east. If this continues, Essos remains what it has always been for Westerosi lords, distant, profitable, and irrelevant. The Second Sons never march under Dragonfire. They do not stand before a burning fleet and choose between coin and history. They simply take the next contract, then the next, while the great powers of Westeros tear each other apart with their own dwindling levies. And when winter creeps slowly down from the far north, when the dead begin to move and the last breath steams in the frozen air, there is no freed host from Slaver's Bay, no black and red banners on the horizon, no dragons to break the sky. Westeros stands alone. The question is no longer who will sit the Iron Throne, but who will even be left to answer the knock when the dark finally crosses the sea. So in this version, when winter comes, Jon Snow stands at the edge of the world with no dragons behind him and no Targaryen queen to share the weight. The wall still rises, the dead still march, but the game he's playing is colder and far more lonely. At Castle Black, his story moves on the surface as we remember. He takes the black, feels the old stone under his hands, rises slowly from steward to Lord Commander. He crosses the ice and the snow to meet Mance, sleeps in Ygritte's arms in the caves, watches the wildling host gather like a storm. But every choice he makes is now made without the faint, half-remembered rumor of a dragon queen in the east. There is no distant ally to dream of, no fire to answer his ice. In truth, that changes the air around him. When he warns of White Walkers, the Brothers of the Watch hear only a stark bastard speaking of ghosts. When he speaks of making peace with the wildlings, there is no whisper that some foreign queen might one day reward such mercy. The room goes silent not out of awe, but out of doubt. The secret of his birth still waits in the crypts of Winterfell and the Tower of Joy, but without Daenerys, the revelation curdles into something smaller. Rhaegar and Lyanna's son is no rival to a dragon queen, because there is no dragon queen. R+L=J becomes a story for maesters and singers, a line in a dusty book. His Targaryen blood offers no clear ally, no sword of dragons, no living bond to fire. Even if Bran's eyes go distant and he speaks the truth, what then? A southern king with no dragons on his banners will not bend the knee to a man who cannot even keep his own cloak unstabbed. After the Red Wedding, the North still bleeds. The Boltons take Winterfell, flaying their way through what's left of Stark loyalty. Stannis still comes, his lean host pushing through the snow, his breath frosting in the air as he stares up at the wall and sees only another battlefield. But there is no promise that someday a foreign queen will burn Winterfell clean, no hope of unsullied ranks or a Dothraki scream to break the Bolton lines. The North must look to its own thin strength. To half-starved mountain clans and broken houses. Melisandre watches all this from the shadows of the fire. Without Daenerys as a candidate for Azor Ahai, her eyes fix harder on Jon. She sees him in the flames again and again, a man standing in snow with a sword that catches the light like slow dawn. Yet her magic is weaker in this world. No dragons stir the old powers, no hatching breaks the sky. She can guide, she can whisper, she can drag him back from death if this continues down the same bloody path. But she cannot conjure fire made flesh. And when the White Walkers finally move in force, when Hardhome falls and the dead come on in a silent tide, Jon faces a different kind of war council. He rides south with no dragons to show, no burning fleet behind him, only a broken Valyrian blade and the memory of screaming whites. In the halls of Winterfell, in the cold rooms of King's Landing, lords will listen, frown, and weigh his words against their own bleeding coffers. This does not need to end in blood, he will say. But without the spectacle of dragonfire, without a living Targaryen banner to unite the desperate, can he make them believe? Or will the North truly stand alone when the last night falls? Because there is one more consequence of a world without Daenerys. The fire that does rise in the east belongs to someone else entirely. The fire that rises in the east never comes west. So when the dead finally cross the wall, they meet no dragons in the sky, only tired men with dull swords and frozen breath. The advance is slower at first. Stannis holds the wall longer with Jon beside him, the Night's Watch, and northern levies grinding down every wight they can, but each fallen man is another corpse for the walkers to raise. When the wall breaks, it is not in a single shattering strike of dragon fire and undead Viserion. It is a series of cracks, a gate forced in the dark, a hidden tunnel overrun while the horns still sound in the silent cold. South of the ruins, the living are weaker than in truth. The Riverlands have bled under Lannister raids and Frey reprisals. The Vale's knights are scattered guarding passes and punishing clans. The Reach is half-starved after Stannis and the Florents squeeze it for grain. Cersei, caged earlier and then removed, has not burned half the capital, but her years were spent on plots and whispers, not on dragonglass mines or new forges. No one has spare gold. No one has spare men. When the dead reach Winterfell, the castle is still the shield of the North, but the mustered host is smaller, thinner, older. There is no Dothraki scream riding out into the dark, no unsullied phalanx locking shields in perfect lines, only northern spears, Vale lances, and a few battered southern banners that rode north because Ned once spared them. The yard is crowded, the airtight, every knight and peasant listening to the wind and trying not to hear the faint scratching beyond the walls. The battle opens without fire in the sky. No Drogon swoops low to carve burning trenches through the whites. Instead, Jon and Davos have lined the fields with buried jars of wildfire, stolen from King's Landing's forgotten vaults, dragged slowly north at ruinous cost. When the dead press in, when the first ranks of shields buckle, Davos raises his hand, the archers loose, and the night erupts. Green fire roars, whites burn and thrash, and for a heartbeat the room goes silent inside every man's skull as they see the field lit like some mad king's dream. But wildfire does not think. It burns friend and foe alike. Gaps open where men were standing seconds before, commanders vanish in a curtain of emerald, and the wind drives the smoke back over Winterfell's own walls. Visibility dies. There is no dragon above to scout, no sharp eyes to mark where the White Walkers advance. On the battlements, Brienne holds the gate until her sword arm shakes, her armor black with frozen blood. Jaime fights beside her, breath ragged, golden hands slick with ash as he drags fallen men back from the edge. If this continues, they both know they will be pushed into the courtyard and then into the keep itself. Arya moves like a shadow through the chaos, but there is no dragon to shatter the Night King's focus, no burning distraction to open a path. Below, the crypts become a slaughterhouse. The dead Starks rise, slow and relentless, and without dragonfire crashing down to break the stone and force an escape, the women and children have nowhere to run. Their screams do not reach the walls. The storm steals every breath. In one strand of this night, Jon reaches the Godswood. Dragonglass blades flash, wildfire barrels are rolled and lit in a final ring around the Heart Tree, and the Night King steps into a trap sprung by blood and sacrifice, a Pyrrhic victory that leaves half the north in ashes. In another, the wildfire runs out, the walls fall, and Winterfell becomes just another corpse in the Night King's army as he turns, slowly, to march south. For now, the story stands on that knife's edge. The knife's edge finally tips at the Trident. Winterfell is gone, its stones buried under ice and ash, its dead marching in silent ranks. Mo Kalen bought time and nothing more. So the last alliance of the living gathers where Robert once broke Rhaegar. Under a different banner now, a torn direwolf stitched beside the crowned stag of a tired king. Snow falls slowly over the frozen river. Jon rides the line, long claw at his hip, eyes hollow from too many retreats. Beside him, Davos, Brienne, a knot of northern knights and river lords whose houses are already half extinguished. Behind them, a forest of crude dragonglass spears, the last shards dug from the caves beneath Dragonstone when the mines began to run dry. Across the ice, the Night King stands unmoving at the center of his host. No dragon fire boils the sky. No scream of wings, no shadow passing over the moon, only the wind and the dead and the creak of frozen mail as men try to steady their breath. The plan is simple and suicidal. Stannis, gaunt and grey, has ordered the last barrels of wildfire buried beneath the crust of the Trident. If the dead press hard enough, the ice should crack, the river should burn. It is the kind of plan the dying king makes when he has no dragons, no second chances, and no sons left to spare. When the dead advance, they do not charge. They simply walk, step after step, shields and broken swords raised, a tide of blue eyes and rotten leather. The men of the Vale vanish first, swallowed on the left flank. House Reed dies in the reeds that once hid them. Karstarks and Umbers break together, their banners falling side by side into the snow. Jon sees it all and knows, in truth, that if this continues, the line will fold before the trap is sprung. So he does the only thing left to him. He rides straight at the Night King. Longclaw carves a path through whites, dragonglass spear points flash and shatter, horses scream and go down. Brienne falls, buying him 3 more heartbeats. Davos is dragged under, his sword still hacking at frozen fingers. Jon stumbles the last yards on foot, armor hanging in strips, blood freezing on his beard. The Night King watches him come. Silent, patient, the wildfire roars to life beneath the ice. Green fire erupts along the river's spine, the crust shattering, whites and men plunging together into boiling, burning water. The shockwave hurls Jon forward. He rises once, drives Longclaw with both hands into the Night King's chest like the last brutal strike of a trial by combat. The other shatters, but not in some clean blaze of dragonfire. His form cracks slowly like glass under a hammer, shards of pale flesh and armor exploding outward as the nearest whites collapse in heaps. Jon does not see the victory. The ice spike that takes him in the side comes from nowhere, thrown by a lesser walker already crumbling as its master dies. When the fires die, half the Trident is a smoking grave. House Mormont is gone. House Reed is gone. Half the North is gone, even in victory. There is no queen on Dragonback to claim the peace, no clear heir to bind these broken lords. Bards will not sing of dragons. They will whisper of a foreign queen who died before her time, and of a bastard king who bled out on a burning river. But in the silence after the battle, as the snow falls on corpses and broken swords, something else stirs in the ruins of Winterfell. What stirs is not triumph. If humanity wins it all, it wins by crawling. Dawn comes slowly over a kingdom that no longer remembers what it is to kneel to a living king. Winterfell is a blackened shell. The Trident runs pink with blood. On the Blackwater, burned ships rot in silent rows. When the survivors finally stagger back to King's Landing, they do not march, they limp. The gates hang twisted, the streets are half empty. Sansa walks past piles of frozen corpses stacked like cordwood, her eyes hollow, her breath fogging in the cold air that never quite leaves now. Tyrion leans on a stick instead of a sword, limping through the ruined throne room where the roof has been blown open by wildfire and storm. Davos stands between them, the last honest knight in a city of ghosts. The Iron Throne is a melted, jagged stump of black steel fused to the stone beneath. No dragon did this. Wildfire, falling masonry, desperate men with hammers trying to salvage something of value from the wreck. In truth, it looks less like a seat of power and more like a tombstone. No one dares sit. The room goes silent as they stare at it, not with desire, but with exhaustion. This does not need to end in blood, someone had once said in this hall. If this continues, Sansa thinks, there will be no one left to bleed. Cersei is gone. Buried under the red keep she tried to make her cage and crown. All her careful lies, all her poisons and plots, blown away by a wind of white death she never planned for. The last thing she saw was not a usurper's sword, but blue eyes moving through her guards as if they were wheat. Varys' little birds are gone too. Some died in the dark beneath the city. Some froze on distant roads carrying messages that no longer mattered. Ravens do not return to a world where maesters lie dead in their chains. His webs snap one by one, and with them the illusion that whispers can stop the night. Far to the north, Bran Stark sits beneath a dead weirwood and watches roads that were never taken. In one vision, a girl with silver hair walks into a pyre and dragons scream at the sky. In another, a queen on dragonback strikes the dead with living fire above Winterfell's walls. He sees the Iron Throne melted by dragon flame instead of neglect, sees King's Landing still full of life, and then the vision is gone. All of it unmade by a single cup of wine in Vez Dothrak. If humanity loses, the end comes slowly, like a breath held too long. The dead push through the shattered gates of King's Landing. They march through the Red Keep, past tapestries stiff with frost, past the small council chamber where chairs sit waiting for lords who will never return. Bells ring once, twice, then freeze and fall silent as ice climbs their ropes. Snow drifts through the open ceiling of the throne room. The Iron Throne stands untouched, rimed with hoarfrost, entombed in a growing pillar of blue-white ice. No king claims it, no sword is drawn. It becomes an altar to absence, an empty prize in a dead world. Somewhere in a vault across the narrow sea, 3 stone eggs sit in the dark, cold, and inert. No pyre, no mother of dragons, no crack of shell. Magic that had begun to stir with them gutters instead. Red priests find their flames harder to read. The old spells of Karth fail more often. Without dragons, the world slowly forgets that fire ever answered blood. Will any future scavenger picking through these frozen cities remember the name Daenerys Targaryen? Or will she be nothing but a blurred line and a half-burned scroll, a warning the world never heard in time? Because in the end, every corpse in this long winter, every broken castle and frozen field, bends back to that one moment in Vez Dothrak, when no one thought the life of a foreign girl could decide the fate of the Dawn. And yet somewhere beyond both victory and annihilation, other pieces still move in the dark. Pull the camera back from the dust and blood of Vez Dothrak, and the contrast comes into focus. In canon, Daenerys survives that poisoned cup and becomes a moving blade, a force that cuts through Essos and Westeros alike, saving cities even as she burns them. Here, she falls before the dragons ever wake, and the world slides back into a more familiar, slower game of lords and banners, of swords and parchment, of kings who think the rules still apply. In truth, that is the first great divide. With Daenerys alive, the board is broken by fire. Astapor's chains shatter, Meereen's harbors boil, the Dothraki cross the narrow sea, and the very sky changes when 3 dragons blot out the sun above the Blackwater and Winterfell. Without her, magic returns as a whisper instead of a roar. No unsullied phalanx marching in silent discipline, no Khalasar thundering at the gates of King's Landing, no dragon shadow to make every knight and lord remember how small a sword is against living flame. Thematically, she is the hinge between the age of stories and the age of ledgers. With her, the world is forced to face the cost of messianic politics, the danger of crowning a liberator as a saint while ignoring the bodies beneath her feet. She talks of breaking the wheel, and we watch the wheel scream as it snaps. In this timeline, the wheel simply keeps turning until the long night smashes into it from the north, an external apocalypse instead of an internal reckoning. The lords cling to their titles, counting men and food, never realizing the game itself is obsolete. Look at the characters who simply vanish into smaller lives. Tyrion never walks the red streets of Meereen, never kneels before a dragon with ash in his hair, never has his last illusions burned out of his eyes by a queen he chose. Missandei dies a nameless slave on some distant dock. Grey Worm rots as a number in a slaver's ledger. Jorah's slow crawl toward redemption ends in a wine-stained exile instead of a final strike beside the woman he failed and followed. Even Jon's struggle with destiny shrinks. If this continues, his parentage is a quiet scandal at most, not the mirror to a dragon queen's claim. And so the moral question cuts deeper. Is the world better with a flawed dragon queen who helps defeat the dead but burns a city full of children, or without her facing the Night King with fewer tools but less human atrocity along the way? There is no clean answer. One path drowns in blood and dragon fire, the other in frozen breath and broken walls. Seen from here, that Season 1 assassination attempt is no longer a minor beat. It becomes a hidden hinge of history, a single intercepted cup on a hot, silent afternoon where the room goes silent and the fate of the dawn trembles on the rim. This does not need to end in blood, Jorah thinks as he steps forward. But the truth is, everything after that moment will. Because somewhere beyond Vaes Dothrak, in a cold land of dead men and crumbling oaths, the night is still coming and the board, with or without Daenerys, has to face it. So we end where we began, with a cup of wine in a crowded market, with a girl who should have been a queen, and with a world that, in truth, never quite recovers from losing her before the fire ever touches her skin. Daenerys falls in Vaes Dothrak, the poison doing what steel and sword never could. Drogo rages, then rots, his promised invasion of Westeros dying in his tent instead of on Blackwater's tide. The eggs stay cold on a silent shelf, stone and nothing more, while the Khalasar splinters across the grass sea, a storm of riders with no star to follow. Jorah drifts, a failed knight with blood on his hands and no dragon to redeem it. Viserys' line ends not in fire and blood, but in dust and forgotten names. Across the narrow sea, the War of the Five Kings burns on, but it burns smaller. No unsullied march through Meereen. No Dothraki screamers thunder at the gates of the capital. King after king rises and falls with only human steel to strike the final blow. The Lannisters bleed, the Starks bleed, Stannis smolders like a dying coal, yet the game stays provincial, trapped in its own room, never forced to look east and reckon with a girl and her dragons. And when the long night finally comes, it comes to a continent that has never seen fire fall from the sky. No Drogon over the frozen trenches, no Rhaegal diving through the storm, no Viserion breaking the wall, because there is no dragon for the dead to steal. Men fight with dragon glass and Valyrian steel alone, or they die in silent fields where the snow covers every name. Maybe Winterfell holds, maybe it doesn't. If this continues without a miracle, the dead have time on their side. That is the heart of this what if. Daenerys is not just another contender for the Iron Throne. She is the fulcrum. Take her away and the magic recedes. The politics shrink. The endgame tilts toward a world where the night does not meet its match. The prophecy of the dragons never breathes, and every choice in Westeros becomes smaller, more desperate, more afraid. So go back in your mind to those scenes. The wine merchant's careful hands. The funeral pyre that never lights. The eggs that never crack. The first beat of dragon wings that, in this timeline, is only a held breath that never comes. The room goes silent when you realize how close the story came to being this version instead. No dragons, no breaker of chains, no burning shadow over King's Landing at all. In that colder world, after the long night is fought or lost without her, who deserves to sit on the Iron Throne? Jon, Sansa, Gendry, no one? Or does the throne itself become an obsolete relic in a land that has seen too much blood? Tell me in the comments whose claim survives in your version of this timeline, and which Game of Thrones what if you want to put on trial next? What if Robb Stark survived the Red Wedding? What if Stannis won at Blackwater? What if this does not need to end in blood at all? Because with one small change, the whole world shifts again. And the next time, the dragons might not be the only thing you lose.